All right, I have another very cool interview here today because I'm speaking with Brennan, who is the founder of a paid ads agency called Jumpstart ROI. And so Jumpstart has been growing very nicely over this last year, which we'll definitely get into. But the main reason why I was so excited for this interview and what I think Brennan has done incredibly well is really master the art of both balancing growth with profitability. Because if you look at a lot of agencies, what you see is that, they can have very high highs followed by very low lows, which can cause a lot of anxiety and stress. But if you, as we'll start digging in, what you see from Brennan is that he really has this very, solid consistency and stability in both prioritizing the growth of the top line, but also of the bottom line. So I think that will be a very interesting kind of dynamic to dig deeper on in this video. And so we'll cover his approach and his mindset to running his agency in this way. And of course, we'll dig a little bit deeper in how finance plays a role in all of this. But before we get into all the fun technical stuff, Brennan, why don't you kick us off by telling us a little bit more about what you guys do and kind of what your background is in running all this.
You got it. Yeah, thanks, Joey. As Joey mentioned, I own an agency. We're called Jumpstart ROI. Essentially, we run Meta and Google ads for clients. We also create a lot of ad creatives for clients. So all things paid ads and ad creative, that's what we do. We started about 6 years ago when I was kind of doing everything myself, as many agency owners do, and we've been growing consistently, pretty much doubling in size every year now for the last 6 years. We've built a whole team around this, and have Joey on board as our fractional CFO. And I'm excited to kind of dive in here because a lot of what Joey and I have been working on for the last year has really helped with a lot of the growth that we've seen. I love talking about the financial side of the business, as Joey knows. So this stuff is always super enjoyable to talk about. So
yeah, very nice. I'm sure we're gonna cover all the interesting stuff. Maybe the first question I wanted to ask you, because I think that's very just interesting to really get your side on it for the people watching, is what I mentioned, like that ability to really balance both the top line and the bottom line. So is this something you kind of had always prioritized, where it's like, hey, like I don't want to reinvest everything and just take on that risk, really try and push the limits on all fronts, versus indeed the more not necessarily a lifestyle business, but just more this balanced approach? Is that something you had always done, or is this more something you shifted towards over your time running this?
Yeah, it's a good question. And even you talking about this, made me think about this the last couple days, kind of preparing for this interview, because I think a lot of it was just natural. It was mindset that I had from my journey with entrepreneurship over the last few years, where when I first started this business, it was just me, and I was trying to, not have to work a day job. And so I needed to live off the money from the business. And so I think part of it was I've always just been very debt averse and not necessarily risk averse, but I just don't like having debt. I never wanted to have take money from other people. I didn't want to have partners in this business. The whole intention was to build essentially a cash flow business to save and invest a lot of money for myself. And then as the business starts to grow, you have to start reinvesting more money, which when you first start out, it's scary, right? If you're making 10K a month and you're I'm spending 5K, 6K, or at that time when I was at that stage, I was buying into at times different coaching programs or things like that, which some things worked out really well, some things didn't. So, I kind of adopted this mindset of, understanding that you have to invest in growth, but, also I think I to your point, I see a lot of other agencies, have these crazy top line numbers, but then they're really not taking home much, or they'll have periods where they are losing money in a month or something like that. And that sucks. That's stressful. And for me, a big thing that I've started to think more about the last couple years as we've, grown to a point where I'm able to like live comfortably and pay my team well, which has been really gratifying. I now start to think about, all right, like what do I just want like emotionally out of the business too, where like I personally don't want a business that feels stressful and where I feel a lot of anxiety week to week. Like one of my like goals for this year is to essentially adopt like a more relaxed day-to-day schedule where I'm not just like tense all of the time. Because I'm like, well, some people love that. Some people, and I thrive under pressure too. And some people just want to like scale as far as possible. And that's kind of their whole thing. And I respect that. But for me, I think I've realized like, I don't really want this just like endless growth trajectory. Like the whole idea of building this business was to like have a certain lifestyle. And so yeah, that's where like the focus on profitability comes. Having you on board has been super helpful with like actually tracking some of those numbers and realizing where we're spending money. And over the last year, I've made some changes where I've just tried like cutting out certain expenses for a time. And I realized like, oh, like I basically just didn't need to be spending that money. Like earlier this year, I found like 3 to 5K a month of expenses that I just like stopped paying for, and nothing changed in terms of our like the top line. Like it certainly didn't go down. So that's been helpful to actually like track these things to know where you're spending money so you can figure out where you can save money. That's where someone like you has been very helpful for us. And yeah, like I want consistent growth, but I'm not willing to sacrifice profitability too much to do that. Like there's times where we do and there's times where we don't. Last year I made some sacrifice in profitability to get growth, and we doubled in revenue again, which is great. And so this year I'm like, all right, I don't really want to, sacrifice a whole bunch of margin for that growth again. I already did that last year. I'd like to reap some of the more benefits of doing this, and also being able to build up some of that cash reserves allows us to then, weather the storm a bit more, and it is going to allow me to like make bigger plays if I do want more aggressive growth down the road, just having more of a cushion to float on,
Yeah. No, I really like that. And that's why I always like our conversations, because it's like, I don't know how to call it. Maybe it's like a very mature approach, because like, especially like when you're on Twitter and even like on LinkedIn, a lot of the content of agencies is like, oh, like the agency hamster wheel or the agency prison, or like, oh, the agency sucks. And like, it's always, it's all this stress and like always bad clients. But at the same time, it's like, well, it doesn't have to be. And like, it's still, no one is forcing people to run an agency. So it's like, I feel like this negative framing is just overused, almost just because like pain sells, of course. And like, of course, it's hard to run an agency. It's hard to run any business. But that's why I really like your approach of just like, well, it should still provide a fun lifestyle. And if you're just always stressed and if you're always worried about like, needing to get paid by this client so that you can, pay off your costs, it's just not a very enjoyable way to live your life. Because an agency should fund your lifestyle. So I really like that. If you then think of like, even thinking back of when we kind of started, which is now almost 1.5 years ago already, was that kind of one of the main reasons for you to even think about bringing on a fractional CFO or just a finance person? Was it, with that mindset like, hey, I want to just get a better view of things and make sure I keep this balance? Or did you have, was it like something more specific you were thinking about when investing in the finances?
So I think the last few years, each year I've kind of like, there's been a different main theme, I guess, of the year. So for us, like maybe 2 to 3 years ago, like we were doing maybe 20 to 30K a month. That was the point where the big shift for me then was kind of from freelancer to freelancer with a small team, mostly overseas team, to actual like agency in my mind, where we had actual like some systems and whatnot. The first big shift for me was figuring out how to consistently get clients. Once we figured that out, then it's building systems around keeping the clients and operations and hiring more team for that. Once we figured that out, now all of a sudden you have more, like the financial management of the business actually requires more time, and you actually like have more data to analyze and make better decisions with. Because when I was first starting out, like let's say you're only doing maybe 10, 20K a month, at least for me, it's like you can more or less manage it yourself. You pretty much know where your money is going because there's not all that many transactions coming in and out anyways. And so I was just doing everything manually in a Google Sheet, and QuickBooks, and just kind of, categorizing the transactions. And, I didn't have that much, at least at the time, although I'm sure I could have benefited from something like a fractional CFO to some extent. But like, number one, you don't have the money really to pay for it, or you don't feel like you do. And number two, there's not that much like forecasting, or like, because things are so unstable kind of anyways, that it's like a little bit hard to, like leverage a service like that. Whereas when you're at like, 50, 60, 70K a month, there's so much more both to like analyze. There's more stuff that you can find that I can save money on, like in the transactions, in the data, more things to analyze. Like now we can look at our, historical churn rate and all of this stuff and like make better decisions with that. But, when you're a little bit smaller, there's just not as much there. And so for me, getting to that point where I was like, all right, now we're at a point where we have so much deal flow, and we have, a good amount, like we had like, 10 team members. So now there's like a lot there to work with as far as like financial information and data and stuff that can really help us grow. So kind of after I figured out like, consistent leads coming in, and then after I figured out, some amount of systems, which we're still always improving on, but like systems for operations, then it was like, all right, like the actual financial admin side of the business, this is now like enough time to where it makes sense for me to pay somebody else and delegate this and pay somebody smarter than me to come in and take over, this aspect of the business. So that was kind of how I knew that would, probably be helpful for me. And of course, there's a lot of stuff that you've done that I, didn't even think of, or like didn't imagine doing. And, where we're at now, I was like, we have such detailed, at least, from my perspective, like so much more detailed financial reporting and tracking than what I had before, which is super helpful. And like the level of detail that we have even in like our P&L now is like way more than what we had before. And so that's been, hugely helpful, because I have a much clearer picture of what's going on financially in the business, so I can make better decisions. And then obviously we've been working now, together on like forecasting out as well, which has also been really helpful. But until you have like some amount of consistency in the business, it's kind of hard to think ahead, right? Like I think a lot of agency owners, to your earlier point, are still caught in that cycle of like basically just every month trying to survive that month, and like, not to say that I don't sometimes feel like that way too, because I certainly do. Like every business owner I think does to some extent, but it gives me a lot more confidence now, being able to look back and say, all right, like we've consistently hit these numbers for X amount of months. Even if we have like higher churn in a certain month, I know based on these numbers that we're going to get this many clients per month, because we've consistently done it for this long. And so that's been super, super helpful, because it just makes me feel more comfortable. And again, back to like the mindset thing, makes me feel like I'm not trapped in agency prison as much, So yeah, hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that. I also remember when we started, you were still doing the bookkeeping, finding yourself, and just really being in the weeds, probably taking hours, a month, if not a week, to kind of just keep the stuff up to date. And exactly to your point, in the beginning, that is just your job as the founder. But then after you cross like at least like 50K a month, your time is just way too valuable to even, be inputting all these figures and keeping track of it. Then your time should shift to making those decisions. So that's, without putting it too much on the spot there, I always like to kind of ask, like, from that data that we now track and like the model that we have, I'm always curious kind of what, for your, from your point of view, are some of those, most useful bits of information you have received that really helped you make a different decision. So if anything comes to mind, could you kind of elaborate on the impact?
Yeah, so definitely like tracking the like actual average client lifetime value has been really helpful. I'd say most of the tracking around retention and churn has been really helpful to see, based on our different service lines, which clients churn more than others, based on the size of those clients, which clients churn more than others, based on the team member that's working on those clients, which clients churn more than others. That kind of stuff has been really, really helpful. Also like capacity planning. So just seeing like total accounts allocated per team member, so we can like understand better when to hire and kind of when team members are getting capped out. Having the client dashboard, like tracking system, where we can kind of identify, clients that are higher or lower risk of churning. at any given time. And that's been super helpful. Yeah, like I already mentioned, the average retainer per client, number of clients we're bringing on versus number of clients we're churning per month, and just kind of seeing that like net increase of clients per month has been super helpful. And then honestly, just like the actual like net profitability, like the system that we have set up where, I have certain goals around like how much we're saving for the business and saving personally each month, and we're tracking that. And then, tracking the actual like, margins on the business where, it was different than what I was tracking before, right? Like I was missing stuff, or I wasn't like tracking it as accurately and stuff like that. And so that's been really interesting to see. And then like tax planning as well. So like switching from paying quarterly taxes to where now we have it where every single month we're paying based on the previous month's P&L, we're paying the next month's those taxes. And that's been like a collaboration between you and our CPA. And that's been super, super helpful for me because I do still look at it kind of on a monthly, we have an MRR, monthly recurring revenue type of business. So that's really helpful so that I know that there's not any like surprise giant payment coming at the end of the year. I just know every single month I'm setting aside that money for taxes so that we're caught up throughout the year has been super helpful as well. So yeah, a bunch of different stuff. And you've helped me save some money on some software costs and stuff here and there, which has been great too. But yeah, big things for sure are like the tax planning, the cash flow forecasting, and then, tracking things like our, churn metrics and, actual customer lifetime value.
Yeah. No, I love that, because that is really the view that I always like to have of all finance as well, where it's like, it is almost just like casting that wide net to really know where you need to prioritize. Like, churn might be fine for a couple months and then all of a sudden it picks up. And if you're not consistently tracking it, you might just miss it and make your life so much more difficult. Or, average retainers might go into a very different direction than you expect, or need software costs. And so like having that wide net of kind of all the departments, not just only looking at bank transactions, but actually seeing how is the sales side do, how's operations do. That's really kind of my view. So good to hear that.
Yeah.
that resonates. Looking at just like kind of what's ahead for you and even what you see about the agency space. So like for any other agencies watching here that might just be interested in kind of like your view of the space. Is there anything you see that really stands out to you, or some big opportunities or big shifts that you're seeing? Probably AI is impacting everyone in some way now. Like how do you kind of see the next year play out just in the agency landscape?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like a lot of times I feel like I'm still like blinders on because I'm still kind of in my own world within our agency. So I don't even know like if I'm, the most caught up on all of the trends that are happening. Like what I can say is I think, a lot of people, especially probably smaller agencies or people that are newer to the space, like probably feel fearful around AI. I know I have at times too, where it's like, oh, is it going to replace, it's going to make agencies obsolete or whatever. And you see a lot of people like, they're posting stuff on LinkedIn where they're using that kind of like messaging to get you to engage with their like offer. Essentially, they're trying to sell you whatever their service is. Agencies are dead or whatever. It's like, that's not true. Like there's gonna absolutely be demand for marketing professionals to help. Like if you have a highly specialized set of skills in digital marketing, there's absolutely going to be demand for that. In fact, I've seen absolutely no change to demand based on the economy or anything in the last couple of years, or COVID or anything. Like our business has grown tremendously, regardless of any of those like macroeconomic factors. Now, that just might be my situation and the type of clients that we work with. But there's still like tens of thousands of businesses popping up all the time everywhere. So there's always a way to get in somewhere. Like there's money flowing everywhere. All you got to do is get into a small, tiny piece of it, And so that's my mindset. Like I think just having that abundance mindset is one thing. Like not being worried about, AI replacing you or whatever. It's like, cool. It's just going to make my job easier in some ways. Like it already has, like I talk to mostly like smaller businesses. They have no idea what's going on with a lot of the AI stuff for the most part. And so if you're simply able to use like very basic, leverage AI very basically, like you'll still just be able to, still monetize your skills and just have an easier time doing it essentially. So I don't really look at it as a threat or anything. I think it's just going to open up a lot of opportunities and make a lot of stuff that we do as agencies easier, and it's going to allow us to give more value to clients. It's still going to be valuable. You're still going to be able to charge them for services. There are some things that might get devalued, but it just means that other things will be more valuable. And the way that I'm looking at it is, rather than for us being, paid ads agency, rather than looking at it as just media buying, like we're really more fractional CMOs for a lot of our clients. So having that kind of mindset where it's like, yeah, like media buying has been devalued in the sense that like you can find an overseas person for very cheap to pull levers for you inside of an ad account. But having somebody that can talk to a client about, how do you actually, like big picture, how do you really actually grow your business? Paid ads being one part of that. That's really like where the value is too. And so, especially working with smaller businesses, they probably already look at a media buyer as like, the person who's supposed to tell them what to do to make money. And so, that's the mindset that I have is yes, we sell this one particular service, but, like we're trying to provide just overall growth strategy for our clients. And that's still going to be hugely valuable as like trusted partners, for those clients. Specifically for us, like the big theme this year is to diversify our sources of leads. I'm not as concerned with top line revenue growth this year as I am just maintaining profitability, and also like working on a lot of these back end systems, like rebuilding our website, which you and I have been talking about recently. And I'm going to be investing more into like my own personal branding and developing content and stuff like that, a lot of which I can do for a pretty low cost. So like I'm basically trying to conserve as much cash flow as possible. I will be investing in some of these things, but a lot of it is just going to be me spending a little more time on some of those efforts. And that's going to really then allow the business, I think, next year to see a lot like more aggressive growth. So like what we were talking about earlier, like I could like invest a ton this year in like really aggressive growth, but I'd probably end up with top line growth, but lower margins. Whereas kind of what I want this year is like just like steady top line growth, but it doesn't have to double like it did the last few years, but just keep my margins consistent while building out a lot of these like other efforts that aren't going to require that much cash input, so that next year then we can make a big play with growing aggressively, because we're going to have better ways to do that. Like right now, I don't have, a way to go spend 10 grand a month on another source of leads and get a consistent amount of revenue. That's what I want to build the foundation for this year, so that next year we can do that, spend the 10 grand a month and get 30, 40K a month out of it, because I've spent time building this, foundation. So that's the theme for this year.
Yeah, I like it, man. That is great. Then I know we're kind of running towards the end of our time here as well. So to kind of close this off, and you already kind of alluded to it in a couple of your answers, but what would you say for like other agencies is like, either, what is the right time for them, or like what are some of the signs that it is time for them to invest in their finances, or, how should they think about, getting a fractional CFO or some help on that front?
Yeah, I think, number one, if you don't know your like in real time, like your month to date revenue or profit, like definitely that means you're missing something. Like I was at least the type of person who was tracking all this stuff myself, but I know a number of other agency owners that they don't, they're still doing like it's May of 2025 and they're like still wrapping up their 2024 finances right now. Like if that's you definitely need to hire Joey or somebody like that to fix that problem for you. Like, if you're not looking at this on a weekly, or if nothing else, you should be, within a couple weeks of the end of the month, looking at your previous month's finances and having all of that totally taken care of. So, if you're just like, if they're really just behind with it, that's not good. If you don't actually know what your margins are, that's not good. You don't know how much you're actually paying your team, or you don't know like where, your most profitable clients are. Any of those things, like if that's not clear to you, you don't have some kind of system where you can literally track every single dollar in and out of the business, you should probably hire somebody like Joey to help you out with that. I think, and you can be at whatever revenue point you're at. Like there's plenty of businesses that are already at 200K a month that probably still don't track this stuff. And then there's, the agency owners like me that were at like 50K a month, was tracking everything, and, just needed to delegate it. So, I certainly think if you're at the point where you have consistent revenue coming in, that can mean a lot of different things. But you have consistent revenue coming in, you have consistent clients coming in, you can probably find ways to spend other time on more valuable stuff and delegate this to somebody like Joey. That's probably a good time to do that. And then certainly if you don't have any tracking in place, then you definitely got to get that sorted. So yeah.
An amazing pitch there, Brennan. So for those watching, if that is you, then just book a call or reach out to me on either YouTube here or on X or LinkedIn, and we can just have a chat, see how we can help. But Brennan, with that said, thank you so much for doing this and for sharing your side of everything. And then that's the video.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, Joey.